Some have called me the first Unitarian. That isn't exactly true, but when I dared raise questions about the doctrine of the Trinity, little did I know it would cost me my life. My name is Michael Servetus. I was born in 1511 of noble blood in the town of Villanueva in Spain. My family was a devout Catholic family. Even my brother Juan was a Roman priest. The Protestant Reformation had been underway for at least a century, and even 100 years before, the reformer John Huss had been burned at the stake for questioning the teachings of the church. If I accomplished nothing less in my short 43 years of life, at least my death shocked enough people about that religious tolerance became important to many. In the years before I was born, Spain was a great bridge among Christians, Islamics, and Jews. But when the Inquisition came along, our country sided with the Christian Europe. Suddenly, non-Christians had to decide between baptism or exile. When I was just a kid of 14, I was sent to work for a Franciscan, Juan de Quintana, from whom I learned a lot. He released me to study law at Toulouse. In law school, I learned that the denial of the doctrine of the Trinity could result in execution. I remember the great and familiar words of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Those are probably the most familiar and most repeated words in all of Judaism. In those words and in all of Scripture, I found no justification for the Trinity. And I could not understand why anyone would believe it. The Jews called it tritheism. My law studies got interrupted. Quintana called me back to go along with him to Rome, where he accompanied the Emperor Charles of France, who wanted to bend fences with the Pope. I was only 18 at the time, and I was impressed, or should I say sickened. There was the Emperor actually kissing the feet of the Pope. I could not help but compare the opulence of the Pope to the poverty of Jesus. It made no sense. How humble Jesus was, and here was the Pope, traveling in style, carried on the shoulders of his servants. It wasn't long after that I slipped away from Quintana so I could develop my own creed for living. I was still a young man of 20 when I published my first book. I called it On the Errors of the Trinity. I had a difficult time getting my book printed. I was refused in Basel. Then I traveled to Germany, where I finally succeeded in Strasbourg, on the condition that the printer and the location be omitted. You probably can't even imagine the reaction to this book. I was in mortal danger in Catholic areas. There are some things I wrote that offended the Christian Protestant reformers. There was no place that was safe. When my book got to Zurich, I angered the church authorities. They thought it would undermine all of Christendom if left unchecked. They were giving me power I didn't even know I had. I was just trying to start a discussion, like Martin Luther before me. In 1532, when I was only 21, the Inquisition in Spain gave orders for me to be lured back to Spain so they could deal with me. However, as long as I remained in Germany, the Catholics and Protestants couldn't do anything to me. They even tried to do it through my brother Juan. I even wondered about seeking a safe harbor in the New Isles, you call it America, so I could escape all this trouble. I decided it was wise to protect myself by disguising my name. I started calling myself Michel de Villeneuve. Of course, there's the thin disguise, since Villanova was my home of birth in Spain, but in France, they didn't know what it meant. Ever since I first became aware of the hostility aroused by such issues, I pleaded for religious liberty. How could there be honest inquiry and open free discussion without tolerance for differences? The ruler of France could usually be counted on for protection, though you have to remember, that could change with the political tides. This was well before the great French experiment in religious pluralism, honoring both Catholic and Huguenot. The situation in France soon became hostile. The next team teamed up with the Cardinal and the Inquisitor in a campaign to root out all heresy. I had to contend with all three at one time. I tried to live inconspicuously in Lyon, France. I edited a version of Ptolemy's geography and Santa Pagnini's Bible. I wanted the Bible to be right, so I worked diligently for 4 years to complete the work. I also expanded my work by doing some editing of geography. While I was on this job, my friend Jean-Pierre encouraged me to study medicine. So by the age of 30th, my 30th birthday, I was a doctor of medicine. I was fortunate because if I had been discovered for my theological views, I would have been banished or burned in nearly every country in Europe. The period of my life was relatively calm until I got interested in astrology. After all, astrology was accorded credibility both in medicine and religion in those days. I stated my views in a statement I called Apology for Astrology. The Faculty of Medicine at the University of Paris took offense and judged me to be a charlatan. I wasn't always creating controversy. I was working hard at my medical work. I had questions that grew out of my studies of anatomy, which led me to discover the pulmonary system, where blood flows through the lungs, deposits waste, and picks up oxygen. It's the only thing about my life from which I get any respect, and most of the world of the Lord has long forgotten this. I announced my discovery and work on theology because I saw no real distinction between the fields of theology, philosophy, psychology, and physiology. I came to believe that there was an area of divinity in every man. Some called it the spark, the seed, the light. I called it soul. And for me, there was no sharp distinction between soul and spirit. From 1540 on, for 12 years, I lived a fairly quiet life in the suburb of Lyon, combining my work as a physician with my interest in editing. Even then, I couldn't keep my views to myself. I was hearing a lot from the Anabaptists, and I liked much of what they believed. I especially agreed with them about the subject of infant baptism. Again, these were things that brought alienation from Roman Catholics and Protestants alike. You probably know that there was very little separation of church and state in the 16th century. In Switzerland, the Catholics had control of a number of cities, especially Geneva. But time came when the people threw out Catholic rulers and Geneva became a Protestant city. When this happened, I had hoped that the brilliant reformer John Calvin might be willing to listen to what I had to say and examine new perspectives on some of the issues of doctrine. Catholic and German reformers alike wouldn't listen to me, so I entered into correspondence with Calvin. However, I soon discovered that our differences went much better, deeper than I thought. Calvin soon wrote a letter to his friend Farrell in which he said, "Servetus has just sent me, together with his letters, a long volume of his ravings. If I consent, he'll come here, but I will not give it my word. For should he come, and if my authority is of any avail, I will not suffer for him to get out alive." What a disappointment. I now had been rejected in Rome, Saragossa, Toulouse, Basel, Strasbourg, Wittenberg, and now Geneva. Calvin never returned to me the manuscript which I had sent him. It was my only copy. So I was forced to take my notes and reconstruct the book from what I had handy. When it was done, I had trouble finding a publisher, but I found one who didn't like Calvin. And so he was willing to print it for me, and we published 1,000 copies. A copy of this manuscript got in the hands of Calvin. So he called his friend Guillaume Tree. Tree had a Catholic cousin in the city of Lyon in whom he wrote about me. He claimed the city of Lyon was harboring a terrible heretic who deserved to be buried. I have his lengthy letter of condemnation if you wish to read it. I was summoned before the inquisitor, but he found nothing against me. Tree was embarrassed and pleaded Calvin to send him more evidence. Calvin did so in a most unusual way for a reformer who took strong exception to Roman doctrine. He assisted a Catholic in the case against me. Somehow Calvin managed to deny this part in this. Finally, the inquisitor had the proof he needed, and I was arrested along with my publisher, and we were sent to prison. A trial followed. I had to be careful about what I said in court. During the days in trial, I got quite familiar with the prison yard. The jailer allowed inmates to go out to reveal themselves at night, and this provided me with an opportunity. One morning at 4 a.m., I got dressed, put my sleep clothes on top of everything else, and asked to go out. Once I was out, they knew exactly what I had to do: escape. As soon as they knew I was gone, they mounted a massive search but found nothing. In my absence, the tribunal passed sentence. I was sentenced to a fine and was to be paraded through town practically naked for humiliation, and then was to be burned alive, slowly. However, I was not there to be executed, so they just burned me in effigy. Of course, I had to go into hiding. I decided to go to Naples, where I would practice medicine, hopefully safe from all these threats. I happened to be passing through Geneva on a Sunday. I knew it would be conspicuous if I did not attend church, so I went. I was recognized and arrested. Some thought I was there to work with the libertines to overthrow Calvin's government. They say I was insolent and overbearing in my trial. Maybe I was my own worst enemy. But really, it's hard to think clearly when your life is on the line. The trial dragged on for weeks until finally on October 27th, 1553, 60 years ago, last week, they found me guilty and sentenced me to be burned at the stake. They wasted no time. That very afternoon, they took me out to Champel, chained me to a stake, tied my book to my arm, placed a crown of straw on my head, sprinkled with sulfur, a pile of green wood at my feet. The executioner flashed his torch by my face before starting the fire that took my life. A half hour later, my agony had ended. It may seem shocking to you, but in my day, they believed that heresy was more dangerous than murder. A murder takes only a physical life. A heretic can destroy a person's immortal soul. Calvin believed that so firmly that he is said to be a party to similar deaths in over 50 cases, although he denies them. And all these were done in the name of Christianity, in the name of my beloved Jesus. Was I the first Unitarian when I questioned the Trinity? Maybe I lit the spark for all of you to follow. So why tell my story to people like you? The point is religious tolerance. If I had to die, I'm thankful that I sparked a strong movement for religious liberty and tolerance. Even in your time, there's a lot of religious bigotry and arrogance and violence. It even appears among you youth at times. Now that's tragic. But you, as modern Unitarian Universalists, have the unique role of showing your community and the world how people of varied spiritual paths can live and work together in one religious community. If you seriously work at that, I will not have died in vain. And you will be pioneers from a great new world. Peace to you all.